All right, everyone. So welcome back. Today I had like a lot of fun with one of my other clients, John, like interviewing them about their transformation journey. And I always find just a lot of my clients' lifestyles interesting, especially my current guest right now, Bretton Carter, which is basically like a modern day hunter and gatherer, for his occupation, paleontologist. So yeah, I wanted to do this podcast episode just kind of he made actually like a huge transformation on his own before we even started working together. I'll let him describe it in more detail, but he lost like a bunch of weight. Then he came to me wanting to lose kind of like that stubborn remaining body fat. And I feel like a lot of people struggle with that. They lose their 20, 30, 40 pounds, but then they have that stubborn body fat in the midsection or wherever else in the body, and they can't seem to get rid of that little bit. So I wanted to interview him about what he did to kind of succeeding getting rid of that and then kind of really flattening his love handles, and also about his job and all that other stuff. So, hey, Brenton, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can you kind of go into your background of how you got into paleontology and stuff like that? Honestly, you're the first client I've ever trained that actually uh, has been like a paleontologist. So
Really? Well, it all started, I guess, back in 1998, actually, maybe 1999. It was a game for the Game Boy that I think everybody is familiar with called Pokemon Red and Blue. Um, and there's, the whole idea of capturing animals and just kind of training them. Like, I don't know what the appeal for that was, but to this day, I find it very appealing. I wouldn't recommend it in person, catching wild animals. Anyway, so I was playing through the game, and there's a part in it where you go through Mount Moon and you battle a super nerd and basically steal his fossils that he worked very hard to find. And later on in the game, you can revive these fossils into Pokemon that you can, train and raise. So I think I collected the Helix fossil, which became the Pokemon Ammonite, which is based off of the real-life Ammonite fossils. And, I remember when I kind of, connected the dots, this was based on a real creature. I wanted to know more about the creature. And I think that was the great thing about Pokemon, too, is that a lot of these creatures were either based off of real-life animals or mythological animals, and I found all of that really interesting.
mhm.
But more so the prehistoric life. So, after reading about ammonites and becoming more interested on, well, how can I go collect my own fossils? It really just started like this snowball effect where I had to know everything about ammonites, and then learning about the geological time periods that they lived in, I wanted to know about the other animals in those time periods, or even the time periods before and after. And that's kind of like a childhood obsession that I never really shook out of, and now it's my career.
Well, can you kind of go into the process of, because you got a PhD in paleontology, right?
Yes, yeah, at
How
the
does
University of Glasgow.
how does that process work? Like, what do you do in your undergraduate, for example?
So my undergrad is kind of like all over the place. Before I even got into the sciences, I started out in illustration and fine arts. And then I realized I wasn't going to make a lot of money doing that, or at least at the time, because social media wasn't really a strong presence. And I think you kind of need social media in order to go into the arts. So that wasn't an option for me back in 2004, 2005. So I switched over to environmental sciences, and I got my undergrad in that. From there, I studied geological sciences, which is where I got my master's in, with a minor in marine biology. So I actually worked in marine biology as I was going for my master's. Um, and when I finished my master's, I got the opportunity to actually study in Scotland for a semester, and this was to finish up my master's. And I just kind of never left. I went there, it had to have been 2006, 2007, and I didn't come back until I finished my PhD in paleontology back in 2017. So yeah, like it was a journey of really figuring out what I wanted to do. And I think that's something a lot of young people can kind of relate to, and even older people.
Yeah. What was your focus with the PhD program?
So I was trying to prove that with the discovery of dinosaur footprints on the Isle of Skye about 20 years, maybe even 15 years prior to that, that there must be dinosaur footprints on mainland Scotland. Um, so I was studying sediment that was very similar to sediment found in the Connecticut River Valley in western Massachusetts and Connecticut, which is really world renowned for its abundance of trace fossils from the Mesozoic period, particularly the Triassic and Jurassic periods. And that sediment was very similar to sediment that I was finding in northeast Scotland, as far south in the Highlands as Drumnadrochit, which actually isn't very far south in the Highlands at all, and then further northeast to Cromarty, which is where Hugh Miller, a famous paleontologist, lived and worked. So it was in the I found one sediment in Drumnadrochit, but I wasn't able to really do a whole lot of study. I did find trace fossils of fossil footprints, but I couldn't really submit that because it was on private property, and I talked to the property owner, and they didn't want me to make a big fuss about it because they could potentially lose that property, which is understandable.
Hmm.
So, like I just kind of looked, I kept my eyes peeled for maybe another year in that whole region. And it was when I went to the village of Cromarty, particularly in the hills just behind Shandwick Bay, that I found another outcrop that was very similar to the sediments I was studying in Drumnadrochit and also the Connecticut River Valley. So, I went back, I brought my hammer, my shovel, I dug enough to kind of expose more of the outcrop, and then I started peeling back sedimentary deposits, and sure enough, I was finding footprints, and they were very similar to what we find in the Connecticut River Valley and the Isle of Skye. So I was able to kind of make that connection, and that's what my PhD thesis was kind of based on.
Cool. I remember we talked about like the first time you said like, oh, I'm digging up all these fossils. I brought up that scene from Fifth Element.
Yep.
I don't know if is that guy technically a paleontologist? He's not, right?
I would have to watch it again.
Okay, it's been a little while.
It's been a long time. Yeah.
Anyways, well, how's your fitness journey? Because I remember you told me, you've kind of at one point gained a lot of weight. Can you kind of go into the background of what led you to do that, or?
So, I think the weight gain really kind of stems from when I had to move back to the United States. First thing, living in the UK and particularly Scotland, a lot of people get the wrong idea that they have like a really weird boiled meat fetish when it comes to their diet, or that they have like a really icky diet, which really isn't true. They eat a lot of the same things that we eat. However, the difference is their ingredients are usually much more fresh. They're not as what's it called?
GMO'd out.
Exactly. Like they come right from the farms, from the neighboring villages or the village that you're in. So, when I moved back to the States, I think it was kind of a shock to my system, both culturally and, like physically, because all of a sudden I was intaking a lot more processed foods. I was eating a lot more sodium. And then, of course, I was back and forth between the continents a lot as I was moving and bringing stuff over and settling my affairs there after, 10 years? And I think just the stress and then, of course, the American diet was a lot for my body to handle. And next thing you know, I go from 175, maybe 170 to 174 to 230. At my heaviest, I was 245, which was awful. So yeah, it was like 2018 that I really started to rapidly gain weight. Because when I moved back to the States too, once everything was settled in Scotland, I became a little more sedimentary, or my lifestyle did, because I was looking for work, because I didn't have a job lined up when I moved back, and I was Like I was just settling into a new place that I never really unpacked from because I was also buying a house at the same time. It was just a lot all at
Hmm.
once. And, we talked before, people typically gain weight or when they don't feel good. And I wasn't feeling very good physically, emotionally. I was mentally exhausted all the time. And it wasn't until I really settled down in my house that I was like, I need to get back to where I was, or I'm not going to be able to continue doing what I do. Because part of paleontology is you have to really fit into these nooks and crannies, and you have to be physically able to hike long distances. And all of a sudden, I wasn't anymore, and I was having a harder time finding work as a result.
Yeah, so for a lot of people that don't know, Bretton, the guy hikes like 200 miles a day, and that's like a slow day today. So it
Yeah,
starts 6 a.m. and ends at
my
5:59 a.m. the next day. It starts
yeah,
again.
my aim is to do 10 miles every morning, and then for the rest of the day, I can just kind of work. I notice when I do it in the morning, it doesn't feel like that I'm walking a lot, and then I have the rest of the day to focus on everything else. So that's kind of where my weight loss journey began. I just started walking, I started hiking more, and then as I started dropping the pounds, I started rock climbing a little bit more like I used to, and that was helping me gain a lot more like upper body strength that I had lost after I gained all the weight. It's amazing how you can go from being physically fit and strong to being kind of a weakling um, in just a year's time.
Well, what was that? What was the one, like that one turning point where you decided, like, okay, it's time to not be like 240 pounds anymore? Like, what's that one event? There's usually
I
one event.
No, I think it's because I never actually weighed myself when I moved back to the States. I knew I had gained weight, but I was always in denial as to how much it was. Like, my clothes weren't fitting me anymore, and I was like, that's fine. I can easily lose like 5 pounds and fit back into everything. So I thought I had gained maybe 15 pounds max. And then I stepped on a digital scale, and when it said 245, I almost fell over. And it's a good thing I didn't, because I would have gone right through that floor in my apartment. Because I was
Scale's
thinking,
broken, damn it.
yeah, well, first of all, like when I moved back to the States, I moved into this rundown apartment because I didn't have anything lined up. And then I decided rather than spend all my money on a better apartment, why not buy a house? So I ended up staying there a little bit longer than I wanted to, but it was, the floors were weak. Like you could hear me walking, and like the neighbors, I'm sure they could hear the creaking of my floors. It was a nasty place. So yeah, obviously at that weight, had I fallen over, I probably could have gone right through the floor.
Well, I know like a lot of people that want to embark on a fitness journey, I feel these days it's like way tougher than it normally would be, not because of lifestyle demands, like people are typically working more hours, et cetera, but also just because of like information overload. Like there's like a
Yeah,
million and five diets, a million and five different workout routines. Like it becomes like daunting to even try to break that down and figure out what's going to work for you. Did you have that kind of challenge yourself?
no, I think that's one area where I'm kind of privileged is because like as an academic, I'm able to process a lot of information all at once, which is why you probably found it shocking that I never had questions every time we would have
Yeah.
like
So for the listeners, I usually do a weekly phone call with clients, and it lasts like 20 minutes. With Bretton Carter, it was like 20 seconds. We're like,
yeah.
I'll talk to you next week.
Well, like because you would send me the data and the information and what I needed to achieve, and like I would read it and it just clicked to me. Like I would maybe do some research on my own after about what you said, but like it all added up. So like, what was the point of discussing it further if I didn't have questions? And it worked out for me too because as of this morning, I'm 172 pounds. Um, I've got my six pack showing, which means a lot to me, and I don't have love handles. Even more importantly,
Well, what did you find most challenging in the beginning when you were 240 at first? Did you find like the lifestyle, the nutrition, the workout portion most
um,
challenging?
so I have a pretty healthy diet anyway. I mean, for those who don't know, I am an ethical vegetarian. yeah, I don't judge people who eat meat, but that's just where I am. So I was relying pretty heavily on carbs when I moved back to the States because I didn't have the freshness that I was so accustomed to in Scotland of fresh cheeses. I'm not a total vegan, by the way. I love cheese. I can't not have it. Like fresh greens, vegetables. Everything here was processed, and when I moved back here, like, I had to make a lot of my meals so quick because I was so busy looking for work or either working, and it became too much too soon. But I think once I got my brain in the game and I became dedicated to lose the weight, it came rather naturally to me because I like being outside and I like walking. I think the most challenging part was in the beginning when I started walking. I could maybe only do 2.5 miles a day before getting winded. But as time progressed, I started walking more and more, and now I walk 10 miles and it's not even a problem for me anymore.
Yeah. And it's part of your, for the listeners, it's part of your job as well. Like you're actually going out there and looking for
Oh,
fossils,
yeah.
stuff like that, which is actually one thing that I found like super interesting because you're posting your like pictures and you're like, hey, I found this like dinosaur footprint. And I'm like, hey, I don't find any dinosaur footprints at the park, you know?
Well, I do a lot of research before I bring my hammer anywhere. And it's really all about knowing what rocks you're looking at and how old they are. So like before I even go anywhere, I'll do research, like a geological study of the area to see how old it is and what kind of rock is there. If it's igneous or metamorphic rock, I don't even bother. You got to go with sedimentary rock, and you also have to know how old that rock is and how it formed. For instance, places where footprints typically form, you won't find fossil remains like bones because the environment allowed for the rapid preservation of the footprint, but also rapid decay of like a dead specimen, which would not preserve very well. Whereas where specimens are preserved but footprints aren't, the environment was just right to preserve the skeletal remains, but not the trace of the animal that it left behind, if that makes any sense.
Gotcha. Very little, but that's okay. I'll rewatch this episode, I'm sure, and I'll get it the second time around.
Right.
Well, was your weight loss in the beginning when you were 240 at first, was it pretty fast, or was it very stubborn to kind of come off?
It started really fast. I think I lost about 10 pounds in the first month. Then in the second month, I lost an additional 15, so that was 25 pounds right there. Then I had about 40 to go. So then, I think it was the very last 15 where it became a problem for me, and that's when I saw your videos. And, the gays love you, so I did too. And, I just saw all of the photos you were posting of your previous clients, and I was like, I think I gotta bite the bullet and just pay the money and contact them, because I can't get rid of these love handles. And it was easy up until the last 15 pounds. The last 15 pounds, I could not for the life of me figure out why I couldn't lose my love handles or, show off my six pack.
Gotcha. Well, what do you feel was like I guess the most challenging part was in terms of like reaching out to a trainer, especially like an online trainer, because a lot of people aren't familiar with online training.
So I'm a pretty skeptical person. So like it did kind of take a lot of nerve for me to really just message you and be like, can you help me with this? Especially online, because I've had personal trainers before in the past, and it's always been in person or at the gym. And in my experience with my personal trainers at the gym, they don't really know what they're talking about. They just kind of like feed you the same thing that the gym will tell them to feed you. So they didn't really get to know me on a personal level the way that you would. I was just another client to them. And I think, in hindsight, I'm glad I reached out to you, because you not only got to know me as a person, but you got to know my biology too. What makes me me, not just mentally, but physically too. And I think that's what kind of separated you from other, fitness coaches. And I think that's why it was so effective with me, because you really got into the nitty gritty of like how much protein I should be having and what else I should be consuming or not consuming, and what workouts I really need to do to kind of target the areas that I wasn't targeting very successfully before.
Gotcha. Well, what do you feel was like your biggest hesitation about online training? I'm just curious because everyone has their own opinions on it.
Like I don't know if I had a whole lot of hesitation. I mean, like it's kind of like going onto a website that you've never heard of before and, just trusting them with your credit card information, like how do you know that I'm not just being taken advantage of? It's just um, that typical, fear that we should all kind of be skeptical of having. But, I think what really helped is that you had a successful track record, which a lot of people don't. And I was, also we were friends on social media. So, like, what did I have to lose other than, like some money?
Gotcha. Well, what do you feel was the biggest change between like doing the approach we took versus like what you're doing already that got you to lose like a lot of weight even on your own? So
So I wasn't really I was pretty much only walking, and I was also lifting weights here and there, but I wasn't doing any pull-ups. I wasn't really doing any of the core workouts that I should have been doing. And I think that's something you kind of picked up on too. And you really drove it home that I need to be doing those core workouts, and I really got to find a way to do those pull-ups, which are the most important, I think, especially for my shoulders and my back. Because like, yeah, like I looked good from the front, but my back, like that's where the love handles were really starting to show, and you picked up on that, which is good. Um, so yeah, happily now I have a very muscular back, and I have a pretty trim front, and yeah, I really like just doing the core workouts and the pull-ups and everything else you had me do aside from the walking that I was doing. And then also you had me cut down on the cardio too, which I think was really helpful because that helped me retain my muscle mass and not get too slim because I didn't want to be too slim.
gotcha. Are you still planning on? Are you still? I've always been trying to during the whole entire program convince you to do your own show. I think like
Yeah,
the Bear Grylls of like paleontology, just running around without his shirt on and hunting dinosaur
yeah,
fossils.
I still am planning on doing that. Obviously, the pandemic has kind of like tossed a wrench in that because even before the pandemic, like when I had my online fossil store, that really thrived because I had a really diverse inventory, and I only had a diverse inventory of fossils because I was able to travel pretty consistently. I can't go anywhere, let alone like I could travel within the states. I mean, there's risk factors there too, but I did a lot of my travels internationally, and we're at a point right now where other countries don't really want us right now because we haven't gotten a handle on the pandemic. So, I could make video content, but if I start now, it's going to be the same things over and over again until I can start traveling more consistently. So
There's
that's
me in
why,
my backyard. Next video in my
yeah,
backyard
yeah.
again. You know.
Or like Ty Lopez, just here in my garage, like,
Yeah. Well, there you go, man. That's
yeah.
low budget, high efficiency. You know?
But that's why I'm starting the blog series too, to kind of transition for when I'm ready to transition from blog to video blog. I think that'll, help me, just kind of help transition my audience basically, so that they see it coming and I can kind of work myself up with that.
Gotcha. Well, what's your take on um, this whole entire like election stuff coming to a conclusion?
Oh, thank God it's over. When Biden was announced, I was ready to like throw on my blue wig and just start dancing. Just I am so glad it's over. It was so stressful, and Trump is trying to drag it out now, but like the election's called. I think as Americans, we all just need to move on, and do better and really get a handle on this pandemic. That's what I think I'm most excited about, is that we might actually have some leadership that can actually move forward with getting this pandemic under control, so that I can start traveling again, and so that 1,000 people a day aren't dying. More importantly, the people not dying.
What's the deal with the travel restrictions? I haven't looked into it recently. I'm planning on traveling somewhere in like April, but I don't know
right.
What the deal is with that.
I know with the UK and a lot of the EU right now, for Americans traveling into Europe, they have to quarantine at least for 2 weeks, which is fair. But the thing is, like, if I'm traveling at 2 weeks at a time, like, I'm going to be spending all of that time in quarantine before coming home. And, that's just a precaution, because Americans, by and large, have not been taking the pandemic seriously. Had we been taking the pandemic a little bit more seriously, maybe the restrictions on American travel wouldn't be so harsh. But, as we're entering our third spike, I think this is just a protective measure to make sure that their people are safe too when we come in bringing in all of our diseases. Which is really ironic, considering it was Europeans that came over and brought over the diseases first, which, killed off most of my ancestors. But it is what it is.
Gotcha. Well, what's your kind of strategy of not rebounding back to being 240? Because I know that's a huge challenge as well. Obviously, losing the weight is a huge challenge, but then
the
bigger challenge is kind of keeping it off for the rest of your life. And I find that's where most people fail, like long term, at least, if not even short term.
So I've been active every day. As you know, I walk 10 miles a day. Well, usually I do a little bit more. I do about 15 to 17 miles in the morning, which takes about 4.5 hours. But by the time I'm done at 9 o'clock, I've got the rest of the day. Early bird, that helps. And I think you kind of trained me into being an early bird, because I wasn't before. You got my sleep pattern all down, which is helpful. And honestly, I'm just not as hungry as I used to be. So this morning I made, in place of mac and cheese, which is a personal favorite of mine, I have collard greens that I grow in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And then I chop them up, and then, I'll add in like queso cheese and like other cheeses, and it's kind of like a collard green version of mac and cheese. And I had that this morning, and a very small dose. I have 3 other servings that I'll have either tonight and then tomorrow morning. So I've been prepping my meals ahead of time, which helps. I've been eating smaller portions, but then again, I'm not as hungry as I used to be. And I think that has been pretty helpful in keeping the weight off. Maybe a little too helpful, because I did lose 2 pounds again. And I'm at a point now where I don't want to lose weight, so maybe I should kind of increase my protein intake at the very least.
Gotcha. Are you still continuing to like lift weights a lot more often?
Oh yeah. So my muscle mass is getting more noticeable. I was wearing a black t-shirt the other day, and my neighbor commented that my chest was popping, which was flattering, because she's a little old lady. And for her to be looking at my chest, it must be noticeable.
Moreover, say your chest is popping. Someone born in 1950 use that terminology.
And she was like a good maybe 50 feet away from me. I was bringing out my garbage can, and she just yells at me that my chest is popping. And I don't get embarrassed, but I was definitely blushing. I was a little embarrassed, because there was like this other neighbor I have that was walking her 3 dogs at the time, and it was just, I don't know. It was flattering.
Well, what's your goal for your physique going forward?
I would definitely like to increase my muscle mass. My biceps are really strong right now, but I want them to get bigger. Because not necessarily for a vanity measure, but I do lift a lot when I'm out in the field. And I know when I gained weight, I was struggling really lifting the rocks and carrying the amount that I need to carry. Because in my backpack, at any time, I'll have a variety of hammers and chisels, which are about 25 pounds on their own, and then I'll stuff them with my bag with rocks as I'm walking back to my truck. And I was getting winded in 5 minutes. Like I could be carrying about 200 pounds in my backpack, and I would get winded in 5 minutes. And now I'm getting to the point where I get winded after about 3 miles, and then I have to take a break. So, like I would like to build up my muscle mass a little bit more so that I could maybe walk the entire duration without having to stop. But we'll see how that goes.
I don't know if you kept track of this. I noticed with a lot of clients, like getting them to live a more health conscious lifestyle, they actually end up saving more money. And I say that because the average American, obviously, like according to my research, spends anywhere between like 7 to 15,000 a year on non-essential expenses, which would include like alcohol, eating out at fast food places with coworkers for lunch, Netflix subscriptions, all these like little things. And I found just getting them to convert to at least a USDA supermarket level organic diet, which is about for 2,000 calories a day, about $12.20 a day, to be a lot cheaper of an alternative than eating that fast food kind of junk or processed food.
So like you bring up a good point. Like so basically the money I paid you pretty much already paid me back with the amount that I'm not spending on like things here and there. So I know we talked about my coffee addiction before, but I had and still have a pretty serious caffeine addiction. But one thing I did to cut down on that was rather than buying a takeaway coffee every morning and afternoon and evening, because I would have to be
and in between all those hours,
Yeah. So I've been making my own coffee, and as I'm making my own coffee, I'm also starting to wean myself down on my caffeine intake too. So making my own coffee was saving me so I would spend maybe on average $10 a day on coffee. So I'm saving $10 a day on coffee. I think 2 months ago I spent $425 on coffee alone for the month. So far this month I've saved half that. And I'm also drinking 2 cups of coffee a day, and eventually I want to get myself down to 1.
Cool.
So yeah, I'm saving money just on coffee alone. And also there's this restaurant up the street that specializes in vegan food, and I love them, but I've also been not relying as heavily on ordering out from them every day. So maybe I'll treat myself to that once or twice a month and not do it 3 days a week like I was before. So saving money there too.
Are you still doing your at-home garden?
Yeah, I'm still doing my at-home garden. So we did have like a freak snowstorm a few weeks ago, and it killed my tomatoes, but everything else survived. So I'm still eating off of that, saving money there. And yeah, I'm just, like I said before, I'm not as hungry as I was before your program. So that alone is saving me a lot of money.
Yeah, like I always tell people, if you convert them to sourcing like legitimate, actual, real food, the typical person I find, especially like in the beginning of the program, eats like 30% less calories and feels a lot more full than they did on a higher calorie intake.
Right.
Because before they're eating just a bunch of empty calories, from like fast food or processed food.
Exactly.
And then when you get them to convert to nutritionally dense food, and this is just across the board, they can look up many studies, like people typically eat just a lot less food when they're eating real food because it's so much more filling.
Exactly.
Especially like being, like having the at-home garden, which is huge, I think, for a lot of vegetarians don't know, but like a lot of the produce at the supermarket, it's like picked before it's ripened, so you lose nutritional value there. And it's like 2 or 3 weeks old by the time you actually buy it at the grocery store. Then it sits in your counter for another 2 or 3 days. And then by the time you eat it, it's kind of just like empty food,
Right. Like when I pick my own spinach, it's like really crisp and fresh and kind of like what I was accustomed to when I lived overseas. Whereas if I buy spinach at the grocery store, I have to use it within 3 days or on its way out. So, like that helps too. But, like understandably, not everybody has the space to really have their own garden like that. So,
True. But then there's always, like companies like farmfreshtoyou.com that deliver
exactly.
from small local farms in your area that grow seasonally.
That's true
That's
too.
like an alternative as well. And it's like a lot fresher than what you would find at the supermarket.
Exactly.
Then there's also the trickery of like the US is the only country that allows like hydroponics to be certified as organic. So like a lot of the
Yeah.
bell peppers, tomatoes, lettuce, blueberries you find, strawberries you find at the supermarket all come from hydroponics. They're not even like grown in the soil. So obviously you're going to get a lot less nutrition there because they eliminate the biggest way that the nutrition gains its or the vegetable or crop gains its nutrients to begin with, and that's through interacting with the soil, the unique
Exactly.
composition between the bacteria and fungi, and then the soil food web that's created to match that unique ratio to that specific plant, like et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times people like I feel like that are eating healthy, they're also missing the huge part about like how's that food being sourced, because this steak isn't the same, like a factory farm steak, for example, isn't the same
A
as a
cheesesteak.
pasture raised steak or even wild game or hydroponically grown lettuce is definitely not going to be the same as lettuce grown in a well managed biodynamic farm that's in the
Right.
soil. So there's like so much variability, and that goes like I feel like completely under the radar of like most people. I
Right.
feel like a lot of times that's the part I have to spend the most time educating kind of like quote unquote healthy eaters on because they'll be like, I eat healthy, and then kind of break down how they're sourcing their food. And it's like, I
Not
don't know,
really.
man, there's a lot of room for improvement there.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, I think that's important for a lot of people to understand too, is that just because the grocery store might tell you it's organic doesn't necessarily mean that it is. Um, and like I argue with my mother about that a lot too, because she'll argue that she's eating healthy. It's like, Ma, just because you got it at Trader Joe's doesn't mean that it's like good for you. And that's her argument. It's like, oh, I got it at Trader Joe's. That doesn't mean shit.
yeah, it's like for the most part factory farm food with a little pretty label, with a
Yeah,
cap
exactly,
on
with
it.
a
So
bow on it.
yeah, exactly. Well, what's your as a final question, like what's your strategy or what's your mindset of how to mold your health goals into like a busy schedule, like entrepreneurial schedule? I know you have like clothing line, plus you have,
Right.
like another shop that sells the actual fossils, and then also you still
Yep.
have to do research. I take it still keep up with your studies and like probably a million other things that I'm not mentioning either.
And I also teach too.
Yeah. So there's
um,
that part.
like it's kind of second nature to me at this point. I think it was a problem in the beginning, just kind of like fitting everything in at once. But what really helped me is that I go to bed no later than 10 o'clock at night. I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I feed my dog and I get him ready for our walk. And then from 5 a.m. to approximately 8:30 to 9, we're going on our 10 to 15-mile hike. And, like I know, like a lot of people don't think, might think that that sounds like a lot, a lot of a long distance for a short amount of time, but it really isn't. Because the way I do it, like the park down the street from me is about a mile away, and then by the time I walk around it, it's 2 miles, and I usually walk around it a few times, and then I just walk home um, after that just to get the 10 miles in. So it's, I think it's become such a part of my routine now that I don't even think about it. And I think that's the best advice I could give to others is to just make it part of your daily routine. Move a few things around if you have to, but it will become a lot more manageable to you. And it's manageable to me because I get up earlier now and I have a lot more time in my day because of that.
Gotcha. Okay, cool, man. Well, thanks for being a guest. Do you have like any other kind of helpful tips or advice that could help other people out that are looking to start their fat
Uh,
loss journey and to not run into some problems you ran into?
yeah, like if you happen to get on the scale like me, like I did when I was 245, don't fall over. And, most importantly, don't panic because it is not the end of the world. And the first step to really losing the weight is kind of acknowledging that you are where you are and that it can be changed. So like never think for a minute that you can't change it. Never think for a minute that this is just who you are, like, because it's not, like, that's a defeatist attitude. And if you continue, oh, sorry, there's just like a random fly flying in front of me.
The pet fly.
Yeah, no, fuck that fly. But like, just, I know it sounds generic, but just be positive and, strive to be better, and you will be better.
Cool. All right, man. Well, honestly, it was great to train with you when we did. I thought you're like one of the easiest clients in the world, honestly.
Thank you.
Cool to hear about your adventures whenever we would have our short weekly chats as well.
Right.
So happy I ran into you, man. Happy that you made, the huge transformation yourself, and then we got to finish the last bit together.
Yeah, I'm happy
to be a part of that. So
very happy with the results, and yeah, I'll keep sending people your way like I have been.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, I'm trying out for a local basketball team, so like if people have any questions about like, because like a lot of the people on this team are people who knew me when I was overweight, so if they ask about it, I'll just send them your way.
Cool. I always appreciate it, man. Honestly, it was great. It was great to work with you. So
Yeah,
thanks for being a guest.
Yeah, thank you for having me.